Dr. Elias Thorne walked down the sterile, white hallway of the hospital like he owned the pavement beneath his feet. To him, the hospital wasn't a place of healing, it was his personal kingdom, and he was the king. As the chief of surgery, he had earned the right to be difficult. At least, that is what he told himself every morning while looking in the mirror. He was a man in his late 50s, with silver hair that was always perfectly trimmed and a nose that seemed to be permanently pointed up in the air. He didn't just see patients, he saw problems to be solved, and he saw people who weren't him as obstacles to be removed. The hospital was buzzing that Tuesday evening. It was a cold, relentless rain outside, the kind that turns city streets into rivers and makes driving dangerous. Because of the weather, the emergency room was packed. Ambulances were arriving every few minutes, their sirens cutting through the sound of the rain. The waiting room was overflowing with people in wet clothes, coughing, bleeding, or crying. But Dr. Thorne was in his own bubble. He had just finished a very complex surgery and was feeling particularly proud of himself. He wanted everyone to know just how important he was. As he turned the corner near the nurse's station, a young intern named David was rushing by with a stack of charts. David, tired and stressed, didn't move out of the way fast enough. Dr. Thorne stopped abruptly, causing David to stumble to avoid crashing into him. "Watch where you are going," Dr. Thorne barked, his voice sharp and loud enough to make the other nurses look up from their computers. "Are you blind or just stupid? This is a hospital, not a playground." David turned red, clutching the papers to his chest. "I'm so sorry, Dr. Thorne. It's just the rush from the accident." "I don't care about the rush," Thorne cut him off, adjusting his glasses and looking down his nose. "I care about competence. Something you clearly lack. If you can't navigate a hallway without crashing into your superiors, how do you expect to navigate a human chest during surgery? Get out of my sight." David muttered another apology and practically ran away. Thorne smirked, satisfied. He enjoyed that feeling of power, the fear he saw in the eyes of the younger staff. It fed his ego. He continued walking, his white coat flapping behind him like a cape. To him, the nurses, the interns, and even the patients were just background characters in the movie of his life. He was the main star, and everyone else was just an extra. He reached the main ER desk where Clara, the head nurse who had been working at the hospital for 20 years, was furiously typing on a computer. She looked exhausted. There were dark circles under her eyes, and her hair was coming loose from her bun. Thorne leaned against the counter, tapping his pen impatiently. "Why is it so chaotic out here?" he complained, not asking because he cared, but asking because the noise was annoying him. "I can't even think." Clara didn't stop typing. "It's the pileup on the interstate, doctor. We have 3 critical cases coming in, and the rest are minor injuries, but there are so many of them. We are short-staffed and every bed is full." "Excuses," Thorne muttered. "If you people managed the flow better, it wouldn't be this bad." "Efficiency, Clara. That is what separates us from the animals." He glanced at the trauma bay doors where a team was working on someone. "Who is that in Bay 3 and why is there a security guard standing there?" Clara looked up for a split second. A pedestrian was involved. A car spun out of control and jumped the curb. Hit a man who was just trying to cross the street. He was pretty banged up. The security is there because there was some confusion at the scene. Nobody had ID on him, and he was pretty out of it. They're just trying to keep things controlled until we know who he is." Thorne scoffed. A pedestrian hit by a car, that was usually messy and complicated. "Another John Doe," he said with disdain. Probably another drunk who wandered into the street. Waste of good medical supplies. He's in a lot of pain, doctor, Clara said, her voice tight. She didn't like the way he spoke about people, but she knew better than to argue. The paramedic said his arm looks bad, and he might have a head injury. They always say it looks bad, Thorne said dismissively. That's how they justify bringing them here instead of the clinic down the street. I'm going to the lounge. I don't want to be disturbed unless it's a real emergency. He turned to leave, but just then, the double doors of the ambulance bay swung open. A gurney was wheeled in violently, the paramedics pushing hard. It was the pedestrian from the accident. There was indeed a security guard walking beside them, holding back a few people who were trying to look in from the waiting area. The gurney was swerved toward a secluded area of the ER, a private room usually reserved for high-profile cases or extreme trauma. Dr. Thorne paused. He didn't like being ignored, and the energy of the new arrival was disrupting his peace. He watched as the team scrambled to move the patient. The man on the bed was groaning, a low, guttural sound of pain. He was soaking wet, his clothes torn and muddy. He looked dirty, and Thorne immediately felt a wave of irritation. He hated when the hospital got cluttered with people he felt didn't belong in his pristine world. "Who is managing that?" Thorne shouted at a passing nurse. "Why is there no senior doctor in there yet?" The nurse looked startled. "Everyone is busy with the criticals from the crash. We're waiting for Dr. Evans to finish up in Trauma 1. "I can't wait for Evans," Thorne grumbled. He looked at his watch. He wanted to go sit down, but his ego wouldn't let him walk away from a situation that looked disorganized. He felt the need to assert dominance, to show the staff how a real doctor handles things, even if it was just to tell the patient to stop making noise. "Forget it," Thorne said, grabbing a fresh pair of gloves from the wall dispenser. "I'll go assess the situation. If it's just a broken arm and some whining, I'll clear the room. We need the space." He marched toward the secluded room, his mind already forming the insults he would use if the patient turned out to be a drug addict or a nuisance. He didn't care about the human being lying on the table, he only cared about the order of his kingdom. He pushed through the curtains, ready to scold the patient for wasting everyone's time, completely unaware that his ego was about to meet the one thing that could break it, the truth. Dr. Thorne pushed through the plastic flaps of the privacy curtain with such force that they rattled against the metal rod above him. The sudden noise made the man on the bed flinch, but Thorne didn't apologize. In his mind, he was the one doing the favor by being there. The room smelled faintly of wet wool and antiseptic, a scent that made Thorne wrinkle his nose in disgust. He liked his environment sterile and odorless, free of the mess of the outside world. He walked up to the gurney and looked down. The patient was a man in his late 40s or early 50s, with dark, messy hair plastered to his forehead from the rain. He was wearing a heavy, dark leather jacket that was scuffed and looked like it had seen better days. Underneath, his t-shirt was torn, revealing nasty bruises already forming on his chest. But it wasn't the injuries that caught Thorne's attention, it was the presentation. The man looked exhausted. His face was unshaven, his eyes were rimmed with red, and he had the sort of weary look that Thorne associated with people who spent their nights sleeping on park benches. "All right, let's make this quick," Thorne barked, snapping a pair of latex gloves onto his hands. The sound echoed sharply in the small space. "I'm told you were hit by a car." "Which arm?" The patient tried to push himself up on his good elbow, his breathing shallow and ragged. "It's my left arm, doctor," he said softly. His voice was rough but polite. And thank you for coming. I know everyone is very busy tonight. Thorne narrowed his eyes. He hated when patients were polite like that. It felt fake to him, or maybe it just made him feel guilty for a split second, and he hated feeling guilty. Save your thanks for someone who cares, Thorne muttered, mostly to himself. He reached out and grabbed the patient's left wrist, none too gently. The man hissed in pain, his body tensing up as Thorne manipulated the arm. Sorry, the patient gasped, wincing. It's really sharp. Like a burning sensation. Pain is a signal, not a diagnosis, Thorne said flatly, his eyes scanning the arm rather than looking at the man's face. He poked and prodded the forearm, feeling the bones. You're lucky, it doesn't look like the bone is sticking out. Probably just a bad hairline fracture. You people always act like it's the end of the world. The patient lay back against the pillow, sweat beading on his upper lip. It's just, my head feels funny too, he ventured, his eyes closing for a moment as a wave of nausea hit him. I hit the pavement pretty hard. My vision is a bit blurry. Thorne sighed loudly, throwing his head back as if the patient had just asked for $1 million. Of course your head hurts. You were hit by a car. That's what happens. But we don't need to panic about every little bump. Thorne stepped back, crossing his arms over his chest, looking the patient up and down again. He noticed the muddy boots at the end of the bed, tracking dirt onto the clean sheets. It made his skin crawl. He couldn't help himself. The judgment formed in his mind instantly. This guy probably didn't have a job. He probably didn't have insurance. He was likely one of those people who clogged up the emergency room because they had nowhere else to go, and now the taxpayers or the hospital's budget had to foot the bill for his boo-boos. You know, Thorne started, his voice dripping with condescension, this ER is for medical emergencies. Real emergencies. There are people out there fighting for their lives because of that pileup on the highway. And here we are, wasting resources on a bumped arm and a headache. The patient opened his eyes. They were surprisingly clear and brown, filled with a sadness that seemed too deep for just a random accident. He looked at Thorne, not with anger, but with confusion. I was told to come here by the paramedics, he said gently. I didn't want to be a burden. Well, you are, Thorne stated bluntly. He turned to the nurse who had just walked in with a tray of supplies. She looked uncomfortable, her eyes darting between the arrogant doctor and the quiet patient. Nurse, get me the splint kit. We're going to wrap this up and get him out of here. Doctor, shouldn't we run a CT scan for the head injury? The nurse asked timidly. He did mention blurred vision. Thorne laughed, a short, sharp humorless sound. Look at him. He's probably dehydrated or maybe coming down from something. We aren't wasting a CT machine on a guy who probably just needs a sandwich and a nap. He turned back to the patient. Stop looking for attention. You have a bump on your arm. We'll fix it. You'll take some ibuprofen. And you'll leave. Simple. The patient didn't argue. He just lay there, taking the verbal abuse without fighting back. That quietness irritated Thorne even more. He wanted a reaction. He wanted the guy to scream or yell so he could justify kicking him out. Instead, the man just watched him with those calm, sad eyes, waiting for the pain to stop. Is there anyone we can call? Thorne asked, not because he cared, but because he wanted to fill out the discharge paperwork. Family a social worker? No, that's okay, the patient said. I can manage. Thorne shook his head. Typical. No support system. Probably lives on the streets. He started roughly wrapping the patient's arm, ignoring the man's sharp intake of breath when he tightened the bandage too much. You know, if you took better care of yourself, maybe you wouldn't be in this situation. Dressing in black on a rainy night, crossing the street where you shouldn't. It's careless. The nurse stepped forward, trying to soften the situation. Sir, we're going to give you something for the pain now. The patient looked at her and managed a weak smile. Thank you. You're very kind. And you, he looked at Thorne, I appreciate you looking at my arm. I know you're busy. Thorne paused for a second, stunned by the man's grace. It was a rare moment where his own nastiness was reflected back at him, and he didn't like what he saw. It made him feel small. But instead of reflecting on it, he doubled down on his arrogance. He didn't want to feel small, he wanted to feel big. Don't thank me yet, Thorne said, stripping off his gloves and throwing them into the trash can with a flourish. I'm writing you a prescription for a strong painkiller. Be careful with it. Meds like that often end up on the street, selling for $50 a pop. Don't make me regret giving it to you. He turned his back on the patient, picking up a clipboard and scribbling furiously. He was already thinking about his dinner, about getting out of this damp, crowded room. The patient was just a problem he had solved, a box he had checked. In Dr. Thorne's mind, he had done his job. He had fixed the bone and put the man in his place. He felt a surge of satisfaction, completely oblivious to the fact that he had just treated a human being with less dignity than he would treat a stray dog. Get him dressed and out of here in 15 minutes, Thorne commanded the nurse as he headed for the door. I need this bed. He didn't look back once. He didn't see the patient squeeze his eyes shut against the pain, nor did he see the look of pity the nurse gave the injured man. Thorne just walked away, his white coat pristine, his ego intact, thinking he was the smartest man in the room. Dr. Thorne stood at the high counter of the nurse's station, the tip of his expensive pen scratching aggressively against the paper. He was writing the discharge orders for the man in the room, but his mind was already miles away. He was thinking about the soft leather chair in his private office and the cup of gourmet coffee that was probably getting cold on his desk. To him, the last 20 minutes had been nothing but a waste of his valuable time. He felt a simmering annoyance that he had even had to touch a patient who clearly didn't respect the healthcare system enough to carry insurance or dress decently. He ripped the prescription page off the pad with a violent tearing sound and walked back toward the treatment bay. The nurse was adjusting the sling around the patient's neck, being gentle and careful, which only seemed to annoy Thorne more. He hated inefficiency, and to him, being gentle with a man who lived on the streets was inefficient. Okay, we are done here, Thorne announced as he swept back into the room. He didn't say hello or how are you feeling. He just wanted the bed empty. He held out the piece of paper toward the patient, but didn't hand it to him directly. Instead, he dropped it onto the hospital blanket covering the man's legs, as if the patient wasn't worth the effort of reaching out his hand. The patient looked at the paper, then up at Thorne. He tried to shift his weight to sit up straighter, but the movement made him gasp. His face went pale for a second, and he reached out with his good hand to steady himself on the metal railing of the bed. Doctor, please, the patient said, his voice strained. I'm feeling really dizzy. My chest feels tight, too. I think it might be more than just the arm. Thorne rolled his eyes so hard it looked painful. He let out a long, exaggerated sigh, the kind parents use when their children ask for a toy they don't need. He put his hands on his hips, looking down at the man with a mix of pity and disgust. "Listen to me," Thorne said, his voice low and mocking, as if he were speaking to a child. "I have been doing this for 30 years. I know what a fracture looks like, and I know what a panic attack looks like. You are not having a heart attack. You are not dying. You are just stressed and probably looking for a place to sleep for the night." "I'm not," the patient insisted softly. He looked genuinely scared now. "I just want to make sure I'm safe to go home." "You are safe to leave," Thorne snapped. He pointed a finger at the door. "This hospital is for sick people. There are people in the lobby right now with real broken bones, with internal bleeding, with life-threatening conditions. By lying in this bed and complaining about dizziness, you are stealing their time. Do you understand that you are being selfish?" The patient fell silent. He looked down at his hands. The way he hunched his shoulders made him look small, defeated. It was the look of someone who was used to being kicked down and didn't have the energy to get back up. "I didn't mean to be selfish," he whispered. "I'm sorry." "Good," Thorne said, satisfied that he had won the argument. "Now, take that prescription to the pharmacy. It's for a mild painkiller. Don't take more than 2, or you'll just end up back here in the ER vomiting all over my clean floor. And don't come back until you have a real emergency." The nurse stepped forward, looking apologetically at the patient as she helped him slide his legs off the edge of the bed. "Do you have someone to pick you up?" she asked gently. The patient shook his head. "No, I'll take a cab." "Better make it a bus," Thorne muttered, checking his watch. "Save your money for a warm coat next time. Maybe then you won't catch hypothermia and waste our resources." The patient stood up slowly. He swayed a little, grabbing the bed rail for support, but he managed to stay on his feet. He looked at Thorne one last time. There was no anger in his eyes, just a deep, sad resignation. It was the look of a man who had seen the worst in people and wasn't surprised to see it again. "Thank you for your help, doctor," the man said, nodding his head slightly. "I appreciate the work you did on my arm." Yeah, Thorne waved his hand in the air, brushing off the gratitude like it was a fly. He turned his back on the patient, his mind already moving on. "Get him out of here," he told the nurse. "And get housekeeping to change those sheets. They probably smell like wet dog now." The nurse guided the patient toward the door. The man walked with a limp, his posture hunched against the pain and the humiliation. As he reached the doorway, he paused for a fraction of a second, maybe waiting for Thorne to turn around and say something kind, or maybe just waiting for the room to stop spinning. But Thorne didn't turn around. He was busy tapping on his tablet, entering the final codes to close the file. Once the patient was gone, the silence of the room felt heavy. Thorne let out a breath he felt like he'd been holding for hours. Finally, he could breathe. He walked out of the bay, leaving the door wide open, and marched back toward the nurse's station. He felt a rush of adrenaline, the kind that comes from feeling superior. He had put a complainer in their place. He had maintained order. He was the king of his castle. He walked up to the head nurse, Clara, who was still dealing with the chaotic influx of patients. He leaned against the counter, crossing his arms, a smug smile playing on his lips. "Well, that was a classic case of Munchausen-s if I've ever seen one," Thorne said, loud enough for the other nurses to hear. "Guy tried to act like he was dying because he bumped his head. Tried to guilt-trip me into admitting him. Can you believe the nerve of some people?" Clara stopped typing. She looked at him, her face serious. "Doctor," he was hit by a car. That isn't nothing. It's nothing compared to the trauma in the next room, Thorne countered dismissively. He was fine. Just looking for attention. I sent him packing with a script for ibuprofen. Best thing for him. Just then, the phone at the station rang. Clara picked it up, listened for a moment, and her eyes went wide. She covered the receiver with her hand and looked at Dr. Thorne. "Doctor, it's the security desk in the lobby," she said, her voice dropping to a hush. "They are asking about the patient you just discharged." "The John Doe?" Thorne scoffed. "What about him? Did he fall down in the lobby and try to sue us?" "No," Clara said, her face pale. "They say someone outside recognized him. The paparazzi are starting to gather outside the main entrance. Security says, they think it's Keanu Reeves?" For a second, the noise of the emergency room, the ringing phones, the shouting, the sirens seemed to just stop. Dr. Thorne felt the blood drain from his face. The smirk vanished instantly, replaced by a cold, creeping feeling in his gut. He looked at the empty doorway where the man in the ragged jacket had just walked out. "Don't be ridiculous," Thorne stammered, though his voice cracked slightly. "Keanu Reeves, that movie star in a dirty jacket looking for a handout." "They are saying it's him, doctor," Clara insisted, her voice trembling slightly. "And they are asking why he was discharged without being admitted. They are saying he looked unsteady when he left the building." Thorne stood frozen. The arrogance that had fueled him just moments ago evaporated, leaving him naked and terrified. He thought about the way he had spoken to the man. He thought about the insults, the sneers, the "get out of here." He thought about the prescription he had tossed onto the blanket like trash. If that man really was who security said he was, Thorne knew his career was hanging by a thread. And he knew, with a sinking feeling in his stomach, that he had just made the biggest mistake of his life. The name hung in the air like a heavy smoke, choking the arrogance right out of the room. Dr. Thorne stood frozen at the nurse's station, his fingers still gripping the edge of the counter. His knuckles were white. For a moment, his brain refused to process the information. He looked at Clara, expecting her to break into a smile or say it was just a joke. But she wasn't smiling. Her face was pale, and her eyes were wide with a mix of shock and fear. "Keanu Reeves," Thorne repeated, his voice sounding weak and hollow, nothing like the booming command he used just minutes ago. "The movie star? You are telling me that the man in the dirty jacket, the guy I just treated for a bump on the arm, is a Hollywood celebrity?" Clara nodded frantically, pressing the phone harder to her ear. "Security is positive, doctor. They say the paparazzi outside are going crazy. Apparently, he was trying to be incognito, but someone recognized him when he walked out of the treatment room. They are swarming the exit." Thorne felt a cold sweat break out on his forehead. It started as a single drop and quickly turned into a clammy film that made his shirt stick to his back. He tried to laugh, to dismiss it one last time, but the sound got stuck in his throat. He remembered the patient's face. The sad eyes, the messy hair, the polite voice. He had assumed the man was a homeless drifter, a nobody, a burden on the system. But the reality hit him like a physical punch to the stomach. He hadn't just been rude to a random stranger, he had been cruel to one of the most famous and beloved actors in the world. "Show me," Thorne demanded, his voice shaking. He grabbed the tablet from Clara's hand. She pulled up the patient intake file. Usually, the photo on the file was blurry or grainy, but the security camera feed from the lobby was now linked to it. Thorne stared at the screen. There, standing near the automatic doors, looking dazed and confused, was the man from the room. But now, seeing him on the screen next to a Google image search result, the resemblance was undeniable. It was him. The leather jacket wasn't old and cheap, it was a designer jacket that had been battered by the rain and the accident. The man wasn't a beggar, he was a billionaire who was famous for being kind to everyone. Thorne's legs felt like they were made of lead. He leaned heavily against the desk to keep from falling over. The realization of what he had done began to crash down on him in waves. He didn't have ID, Thorne whispered, more to himself than to Clara. He didn't tell me who he was. Mr. Reeves is known for being private, Clara said softly, her voice trembling slightly. He probably didn't want to make a scene. He just wanted help. Thorne closed his eyes, and the memory of the last hour played in his mind like a horror movie. He saw himself tossing the prescription onto the patient's chest. He heard his own voice calling the man selfish. He remembered the sneer when he suggested the patient sell his painkillers on the street. The humiliation washed over him, hot and unbearable. He had treated a human being like trash because of how the man looked. And not just any human being, a man who was known worldwide for his humility and generosity. Then, a second, even more terrifying thought struck Thorne. He remembered the hospital board meeting from last month. They had been discussing a massive donation for a new pediatric wing. They had kept the donor anonymous, referring to him only as the benefactor. The rumors were that it was a celebrity, someone local who loved the city. Thorne grabbed Clara's arm, his grip tight and desperate. Clara, the donation. The new children's wing. Is it him? Clara looked at him with a solemn expression and nodded slowly. The paperwork was finalized last week. We were supposed to announce it at the gala next month. Yes, doctor. It's him. Mr. Reeves is the one paying for the new building. The room seemed to spin. Dr. Thorne felt like he was going to be sick. He hadn't just insulted a celebrity, he had insulted the man who owned this hospital. The man who was essentially his boss. If Mr. Reeves decided to pull the funding because of the way he was treated, the board would have Thorne's head on a platter. His career, his reputation, his pension, everything was at risk because of his own massive ego. We have to find him, Thorne said, his voice rising in panic. He wasn't the calm, collected surgeon anymore. He sounded like a scared child. Where did he go? He's at the main exit, Clara said, looking at the monitor. But doctor, the press is there. He can't leave safely like that. Security is trying to clear a path. Thorne didn't wait for her to finish. He pushed away from the desk and began to run. He didn't walk, he ran down the hallway, his white coat flapping behind him. He bumped into a janitor and didn't even stop to apologize. He didn't care. All he could think about was damage control. He had to apologize. He had to fix this. He had to make sure Mr. Reeves didn't leave the building thinking that the entire hospital was run by arrogant monsters. As he ran, his mind raced with excuses. He would say he was tired. He would say it was a misunderstanding. He would say he didn't recognize him. But deep down, Thorne knew that none of those excuses mattered. The truth was ugly. He had seen a man he thought was below him, and he had treated him like dirt. And now, the universe had flipped the table, and Thorne was the one who was about to be judged. He burst through the double doors that led to the main lobby. The noise was chaotic. He could see camera flashes popping through the glass doors, and hear the shouting of the paparazzi outside. In the middle of the chaos, near the security desk, stood the man. Keanu Reeves was leaning against a wall, looking pale and tired, still clutching his injured arm. He was surrounded by 3 large security guards, but he looked lonely. Thorne stopped running for a second to catch his breath. He looked at his reflection in the glass of a vending machine. His hair was messy, his face was red and sweaty. He looked like a mess, while the homeless man he had kicked out stood tall, even in pain. The irony was bitter. Thorne straightened his coat, took a deep breath, and tried to put on his doctor face. But the mask was cracked. He wasn't a god walking into a room anymore. He was a beggar walking to the throne. He started walking toward the actor, his heart pounding in his chest so hard he could hear it in his ears. He knew that in the next few minutes, his entire life could change forever, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. Dr. Thorne's heart was hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird desperate to escape. The distance between the nurse's station and the main lobby had never felt so long, yet he covered it in seconds, his lab coat flailing behind him. As he got closer, he could see the chaos through the glass walls of the entrance. Outside, a crowd of people with cameras was pressing against the doors, flashbulbs going off like lightning in a storm. Inside, the security team was forming a tight circle around the man in the leather jacket. The air was thick with tension. Thorne reached the group and tried to catch his breath, but his lungs were burning. He straightened his tie, even though his hands were shaking violently. He needed to look professional. He needed to look like he was in control, even though he felt like his world was crumbling. "Mr. Reeves?" Thorne called out, his voice cracking slightly. He tried to make it sound authoritative, but it came out as a desperate squeak. "Mr. Reeves, please wait." One of the large security guards stepped in front of him, holding up a hand. "Sir, you need to step back. The patient is leaving. I am the chief of surgery." Thorne shouted, perhaps a bit too loudly, causing a few people in the waiting room to stare. "I treated this man. I need to speak to him. It is a matter of urgent medical follow-up." The guard hesitated, looking back at the patient for approval. Keanu Reeves, still looking pale and clutching his injured arm, looked over the guard's shoulder. His eyes locked onto Dr. Thorne. There was no recognition in his gaze, only a quiet, exhausted confusion. He nodded slightly to the guard, giving permission. Thorne swallowed hard and stepped into the circle. Up close, he could see the sweat on the actor's forehead and the genuine pain etched around his eyes. Thorne felt a wave of nausea. This was the man he had told to stop whining. This was the man he had accused of looking for drugs. "Mr. Reeves," Thorne started, his voice dropping to a humble, pleading tone. I am Dr. Thorne. I was the doctor in the trauma bay. I just realized there was a terrible misunderstanding with your paperwork." Keanu looked at him for a long moment. The silence was heavy. "I thought the paperwork was fine, doctor," Keanu said softly. "You gave me a prescription for ibuprofen. You told me to stop wasting resources." Thorne flinched as if he had been slapped. Hearing his own cruel words thrown back at him by the person he had insulted was devastating. I was under immense pressure," Thorne stammered, sweat now dripping down the side of his face. "I didn't know who you were. If I had known, I never would have spoken to you that way. Please, you can't leave. We have a private VIP suite on the 5th floor. It has the best view of the city. We have top specialists on call. I can personally call the best orthopedic surgeon in the state. He can be here in 20 minutes. He was babbling now, offering everything he had denied the man just minutes ago. The irony was suffocating. 10 minutes ago, this man wasn't worth a CT scan. Now, Thorne was offering him the keys to the kingdom. Keanu looked at Dr. Thorne, and for the first time, a flicker of disappointment crossed his face. It wasn't anger, it was something much worse. It was the look a parent gives a child who has let them down. "Doctor," Keanu said gently. "My arm is broken. It hurts. My head hurts, too. But I am still the same person I was when I walked into that room. When you thought I was just a guy in old clothes, you told me to leave. You told me I was selfish." "I was wrong," Thorne whispered. "I was so wrong. Please, let me make it right. The hospital, we value you. You are our benefactor. The new children's wing." "The children's wing is for the children," Keanu interrupted him firmly but kindly. "Not for me. My money doesn't buy me better care than the person lying in the hallway right now." "Does it?" The question hung in the air. It was a knife that cut right through Thorne's ego. Thorne looked down at his expensive shoes. "No," he mumbled. "It shouldn't. If I were just a nobody," Keanu continued, his voice barely audible above the noise of the lobby, "would you be chasing me down the hall right now? Would you be offering me the VIP suite?" Thorne wanted to lie. He wanted to say yes, of course he would. But he couldn't. The truth was toxic in his mouth. He stood there, unable to speak, paralyzed by his own shame. Keanu sighed softly, wincing as he shifted his weight. "I appreciate the apology, doctor. I really do. But I think I'll go to a different hospital. One where I can just be a patient who needs help." "No, please." Thorne cried out, thinking about the board of directors, thinking about the lawsuits, thinking about his career ending in disgrace. "If you leave now, the press, they will destroy us. Please, let us treat you properly." Keanu looked at the security guard, then back at Thorne. He seemed to be thinking. Finally, he nodded. "Okay. I will stay. But not in the VIP suite. Put me in a room with everyone else. And treat me like you would treat anyone else. Not better, not worse. Just a person." Thorne felt the weight lift from his shoulders, but a heavier weight settled on his heart. "Yes. Of course. Anything you say." "And doctor," Keanu added as he turned to follow the guard toward the elevators. He paused and looked back over his shoulder. "Next time someone comes in here, scared and in pain, try to see them. Really see them. Not their clothes. Not their insurance card. Just the human being." With that, he walked away. The crowd of paparazzi surged as the doors opened, but the security team held them back. Keanu stepped into the elevator, disappearing from view. Dr. Thorne stood alone in the middle of the lobby. The noise around him seemed to fade into a dull hum. He looked around the emergency room. He saw the tired mother holding a crying baby. He saw the elderly man in a wheelchair waiting for a ride. He saw the homeless man sleeping in the corner of a waiting chair. For years, Thorne had walked past these people, seeing only problems, annoyances, and obstacles. He had seen himself as superior. He thought about the easy arrogance he had felt just an hour ago. It felt like a lifetime ago. That arrogance was gone now, burned away by the sad eyes of a man he had judged wrongly. Dr. Thorne took a deep breath and wiped the sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand. He walked back toward the trauma bay, but he didn't walk with his usual aggressive stride. He walked slowly. He stopped at the nurse's station where Clara was watching him with a look of pity. "Clara," Thorne said quietly. "Is the elderly lady in curtain 4 still waiting for her discharge papers?" Clara blinked, surprised. "Yes, doctor. She's been there for 2 hours." "Get me her file," Thorne said, his voice soft but steady. "I'm going to take it to her personally. And, send in the next patient. The one with the headache. The one you wanted me to check earlier." "Really?" Clara asked, a small smile forming on her lips. "Yes," Thorne said. "I think I need to learn how to be a doctor again." He turned and walked into the treatment area, leaving his ego behind him. For the first time in a long time, he didn't feel like a king. He just felt like a man who had a lot of work to do.